You're listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast, coming to you from the Kitchen Studios, located high atop the historic Raleigh building, located in the heart of downtown Raleigh. The NC F&B Podcast takes you behind the scenes of North Carolina's food and beverage industry. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at NCFBPod. This episode is sponsored in part by Food Scene. That's foodseen.com. Providing professional photography, social media management, video production, and website design. That's Food Scene. And now, the sommeliers to the stars, the barbacks in your backyard. It is Max and Matt.
Hello, and thank you for listening to the North Carolina Food and Beverage Podcast. I am your co-host, Max Trujillo.
And I am your co-host, Matthew Weiss. And we are headed out to the farm. That is Joyce Farms. We are here with the owner of Joyce Farms, Mr. Ron Joyce. We are also here with one of his sales specialists, Mr. Charles Schleppe. And also another one of the farmers that you guys work closely with, Mr. Adam Grady from Kenansville, North Carolina. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I do have to say, just right off the bat, growing up, a lot of people wanted to be superheroes or firemen or cops, but farming has now become cool. And it is no more evident than in my 2.5-year-old son, who now walks around and says, I'm the farmer. I'm the farmer. Kids want to grow up to be farmers now.
Well, we hope so.
Yeah.
We need young people getting into farming.
That smooth, sultry voice is one of Ron Joyce.
Ron, you are the second generation of the Joyce family, is that correct?
Yes.
So your father, Alvin Joyce, started Joyce Farms in 1962 in Winston-Salem, still near in Winston-Salem. You came into the fold, what was it, the late 70s, early 80s, kind of when you started to be more relevant?
Yeah, in the early 70s.
Okay.
Right after graduating from college.
Okay. And then, of course, your sons as well you've got them to work. You put them to work.
Yes.
They're not making any money, though, right? You work off your college
Yeah,
fund.
they have it a little better than I did, which it should be with each generation. But, they finished their education, and it was kind of a surprise to me. They both said they wanted to join the company. I was a firm believer in not pressing children into getting into the family business. And knowing that it's not always an easy business, you always have a dream for your children to have a better life. And but it's worked out very well. They contribute a lot to the business, and they're an integral part of what we do today, and also the future of the business, to continue the business beyond me.
Right. So the business at hand, what we're talking about at Joyce Farms initially, and probably what most people would know you, is from the chicken farming. That was kind of where you started from. Now, of course, the business has expanded, and we'll get into all of that a little bit more because you're doing more than just chicken. But chicken farming was what your father saw a good place to start with an industry. Now, why did he choose that? Was that based on family before him, or why did we get into chicken farming?
Well, we actually were just a distributor at the time, and he worked for a family-owned poultry company that was headquartered in Wilkes County called Holly Farms at the time. And when that company, management changed with that company, and it's, of course, been sold a couple of times since, he started his own poultry distribution company. So we started out as a distributor.
Where was the impetus of going solely with chicken farming in general? And was it chicken and was it egg farming as well? What came first, chicken or the egg?
No, it was the chicken. With us, it was the chicken.
Okay.
And we were selling to a growing number of chefs. And as I got to know the chefs more on a personal basis, a lot of these chefs were from Europe or had spent some time in Europe. And we always strived at the time, we said we had the best poultry in America. And my horizon got broadened a little bit by talking to these guys when they started mentioning the Le Beurre Rouge program in France, which was considered the best in the world. So, of course, once I knew that, I couldn't just remain the best in America. So we started researching the Le Beurre Rouge program. And when I first went to France, I was absolutely amazed at the difference in the quality and the diversity of different breeds of chickens and different kinds of poultry that's available to a French family every day of the week. at a local butcher shop. And realizing here in a country as large as ours and as rich as ours, that we basically had one chicken in this country, a commercially produced, fast-growing Cornish cross.
That's what most people know when you think of a chicken farming in America.
Yes.
And so what was the timeline when you went back to France? When was this when you were back there and discovering these things?
This was probably in the 90s.
Okay, so 20 years, 25 years. So for a long time, you, along with your counterparts, were growing the Cornish. Say it again.
Well, it's basically a Cornish cross bred with other breeds, and the race with the producers in America in the poultry business is who can grow a chicken faster and cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself, the average chicken's life expectancy currently is about 40 days. That's for the Cornish cross.
Yes.
But and it's funny, we just had a podcast with some French ladies that you probably heard the week before, but as they were walking out, the first question out of one of their mouths was, that's 81 days, 82? That was the first thing she said, because she knows the life expectancy, or what the
processing time.
The processing time takes for the chicken, and she is from France, so that's in her background. That's inherent right there.
And she immediately knew the difference, and she's right. The standard for the Label Rouge chickens in France is a minimum growing time of 81 days. So it requires not only the specific Label Rouge genetics, but those genetics have to be a slow-growing breed. So she immediately recognized that. Our program is 84 days.
Interesting. So obviously, if you're just talking about supply, demand, business is business sake, you're slowing your process down tremendously.
Yes.
Versus somebody just knocking out a bunch, hitting the market as fast as possible.
Right. And the poultry industry in America has done a great job in efficiencies, growing chickens faster, getting chickens larger. When I got into this business, the average broiler fryer was about 2.5 to 3 pounds. Today, they're about 4 to 4.5 pounds. Wow. And that's being done in 6 weeks. And it's also, they've been able to lower the feed or improve the feed conversion. In America, it's very competitive. It used to take about 3 pounds of feed to put a pound of live weight on a chicken in these older, slower-growing breeds. Today, with a modern commercial cross, I believe it's down under 1.7 pounds to 1. So you can tell it's much cheaper to grow a commercial chicken, and it's much faster. The problem is the faster growth does not develop flavor. The bird does not have the time to develop the flavor that chickens of years ago did.
And what you're talking about is a lot of times is like a GMO feed, right? And it's steroids. It's you're giving. I mean, if a chicken is eating 1 pound of food and it grows 1 pound of its body mass, that's significant. I mean, think about if you had a quarter pounder, you're going to weigh a quarter pound more just permanently. That's the way
it's
you're
not
going to be.
Quite that good. It's 1.6 or 1.7 to 1.
But still, for the sake of because I'm trying to be fake news, right? No, but for the sake, I mean, that's pretty impactful in their diet, and again, that's not because it's such rich and delicious product going into their systems. It's filler. It's to boost their hormones so that they can just grow at a really fast rate. But really, what we're saying is we're just kind of ballooning the chicken to just meet weight standards,
right, and as quickly as possible. And let's talk about one thing, though, because we pride ourselves in being transparent and being honest. A lot of people assume that chickens are like other animals are given steroids or hormones to make them grow faster. That is not true. Okay. No one's chicken. The steroids or the hormones are not allowed in poultry or pork in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it's through genetic selection. You take the fastest growing, largest bird from this flock and you breed them with the fastest growing, so over a period of years, you start getting faster growing, larger birds.
Got it. The idea is you can go for quality or you can go for quantity.
Right.
And you have chosen the path of quality.
We actually, our word is flavor.
Flavor.
We were looking for the best tasting meat and poultry in America until I went to France and broadened my horizons. And then my goal became, let's develop or produce the best started with poultry, the best poultry in the world, not just in America. So that led us to importing the genetics from France for the Label Rouge program and growing them exactly the same ways they're grown in France and processing the same way. We even air chill, which is a process of chilling the birds that's kind of unique to Europe.
Yeah, and people out there, no matter what industry you're in, listen to what Ron did. He listened to his clients. You have chefs that you were speaking to. Those are the people that you were selling your products to. And the chefs, who came from various places all over the world, and in this case in France, or in Europe, I'm sorry, said, oh, these are fine. These chickens you're producing are fine, but they're nothing like the ones we have back home. Yeah. And you got to go check it out. So what did he do? He researched and then actually got out there and got in there to understand his market, which seems like it's an obvious thing, but it very many times gets overlooked. Like, okay, that's fine. Well, we'll do it for here. We'll do what's best here. But you had this pursuit for flavor. You had this pursuit to make a better product than somebody else. And just that in itself, business-wise, is rare in this industry. So I applaud you for that. Now, in doing that, your products, and we said before we even got on the mics, most of your product line isn't available necessarily to retail, and we'll get into that and some of those ideas. But you are direct to, like, wholesale to restaurants, and that's where most of the time somebody, a diner is going to eat a Joyce Farms chicken. It's because it is from a great restaurant here in the Triangle or out there in Winston-Salem or across the country for that matter. But what was your impetus for sticking to the wholesale market and to direct to restaurants as opposed to retail?
Well, we had to make a decision several years ago. We're a small company. We're about 100 employees. We don't have the financial resources or budget to market and compete against the giants in the industry on a retail level. And there's so many things that are different about our products, not just the poultry, but the beef and the pork also, that is very difficult to communicate to a retail shopper walking down the meat counter of a grocery store. So it is a little easier to educate chefs on what we're doing.
Yeah, there's a big conversation. Chris Reed, who is the head of the Piedmont Culinary Guild, was discussing about how the price of chicken is not the real price of chicken.
Right.
And so we're trained now to pay X amount of dollars for a whole chicken, which is just astonishing. But then if you had a Joyce Farms chicken, to understand the fact that it's, aged for twice as long, the genetics that you've gone through and all the processing is of the highest quality, how do you translate that for value's sake, into the purchaser's mind?
Yeah, for a 10-second message at the meat counter to differentiate our product at a higher cost. What we're doing does cost substantially more to produce.
Right.
But we've cut everything out that we possibly could, taking a model from the commercial guys, in that we import the breeder eggs from France. We produce our own roosters and hens. We then, after they mature, produce our own eggs. We have our own hatchery where we hatch those eggs. So there's no middleman in between. We contract with farmers. We have our own transportation to take the baby chicks to the farm, pick up the chicks when they're ready to be processed back to the plant. We do our own processing. So we've made it as efficient as it possibly could be. My goal was to offer a Label Rouge chicken, which we call ours the Poulet Rouge, in America at about the same price difference as it's offered in France, which in France it's about 2.5 to 3 times the price of a commercial commodity Cornish cross chicken. So we're there, but we're there because we do everything in-house. And
how many farms are doing this in the United States, doing Label Rouge chickens?
Nobody.
You're the only ones.
Which keeps me awake at night sometimes. But it's
awake because it's
well, we're the only ones. So why are we the only ones?
Oh.
And I think the reason is the commitment and financial risk that it took for us to bring this program to the United States and get it started. And it's like any new business venture. You do not make money in the first 2-3 years. It's it's an investment.
Unless you're a podcaster, and then you make a lot of money the first couple of years.
Right away.
Yeah,
right. But so we had to stick with it. We had to have faith in the program. And probably, for the small farmer to start this, the investment up front would be fairly large, and it's fairly risky. And for the large guys to do it, for the big commercial companies, I can't imagine them growing a chicken that takes 81 to 84 days to grow.
Yeah.
And the other thing we found is that this bird is a lot smaller. Remember, we're going back to the heritage or heirloom chickens of years ago.
Right.
So our average size is 3 pounds. Well, guess what? Chickens sell by the pound. So if you're a commercial guy, you're running 1 million birds through a plant in a given period of time. If your average weight is 4.5 pounds versus 3 pounds, that's a lot more pounds to sell. So we have a disadvantage cost per pound wise because the birds, even we go through 84 days and get the product to the plant and through the plant, we've only got 3 pounds to sell. So that's another thing that influences cost.
Sure.
You know, we actually mentioned La Belle Rouge chickens on an episode number 7, going all the way back to the beginning. This is back when we were recording not only in my basement, but this person was the first female on the podcast.
Oh.
And before we say the answer, we're going to pause. All of our avid listeners, think back to episode 7. Who was that person? Who is it? We'll come back. We're going to take a quick break to hear about Forest Firm. And when we come back, we'll let you know who that was.
Everybody has legal questions, especially in the food and beverage industry. So that's why we've provided the Forest Firm to help us out. And if you follow us on Instagram at NCFB Pod, we'll put out a post weekly from Forest Firm and ask a question. It might be the question that we ask on the show.
Today we have an attorney from the Forest Firm, Kelly Ovius, who specializes in trademark law. So, hello, Kelly. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Fantastic. Well, before we even turn these mics on, we started talking about one of the most important things about businesses when you're getting one started, naming the business. That is a question that so many people get themselves wrapped in. For one, how important is a name to a business?
Well, to me as a trademark attorney, of course, I'm a little biased, but I think it's very important. I mean, that is your brand. That is how you differentiate yourself from the crowd.
If you are in the naming process, what would be some of the simple steps that you would advise someone just right off the bat so you don't waste too much time?
Well, what I always advise my clients is try not to fall in love with a name before you do some trademark due diligence. Ideally, talk to a trademark attorney. But I know a lot of people don't want to spend that money, but there are things you can do on your own. Search the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office records. Do some keyword searching on search engines because I have seen it many, many times that a client has run down the road with a name that they just love. And they come to find out there's somebody somewhere else who came up with the same name or a really similar name for the same or a similar business. And that's problematic from a trademark standpoint.
So how does it happen? Being that we're in North Carolina, does it differ from state to state? Like if I wanted to have Tony's Taco Tubes on Tuesday here in North Carolina, previous episode, but there's also a Tony's Taco Tubes in Arizona. Does that matter, or how does that affect the business?
I will use a trademark attorney or any attorney's favorite phrase, it depends. Under what's known as the common law of trademarks, those two businesses can coexist in their geographic areas because common law rights just extend to the localities that you serve. So if you're in Arizona and I'm in North Carolina and we're not expanding, we are where we are, we could coexist forever and it's fine. But let's say I'm opening my business in North Carolina, but you in Arizona have a federal trademark registration. Your federal trademark registration gives you priority throughout the United States. So if you already went and you got that registration and I'm starting up in North Carolina, even if you're not physically in North Carolina, it's still problematic for me because federal registration gives you rights throughout the country.
That's great to know. Thank you so much.
To learn more about the Forest Firm and what they can do for you, click the link in our show notes or visit forestfirm.com/NCFB to request a free consultation for your business. You can also reach them at 877-669-1455. Forest Firm, business attorneys across North Carolina.
All right, and we're back. Any guesses? Who is this person we're talking about?
Could this be Jamie DeMint?
Ding, ding, ding. Give Charles a free
listener.
chicken. Yeah.
Seriously.
That's right. Jamie DeMint, obviously the author of Farmhouse Chef, great cookbook, really awesome recipes that anyone can jump into and understand. Owns Bella Bean Organics, and she this is not a commercial for Bella Bean. I just am a big fan. We've been ordering her eggs and chicken and all this from her farm, but it wasn't really actually coming from her farm. It was coming from Joyce Farms, and she specifically talked about how those chickens are raised, how it was such an important aspect to her, and that's why she chose to work with Joyce Farms. And so I eat naked chicken and naked pork and naked beef all the time. That's if you go to the Trujillo family and look in the freezer in my house, that's all you will see is all that stuff. So let's get into that. Let's talk about what does it mean to have naked meat?
Well, again, as a small producer, we were looking for a way to distinguish our regular line, our less expensive line, which is a commercial, more like a commercial Cornish cross in our naked chickens, but all natural. If you really dig into the meaning with USDA, it doesn't mean a lot.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the way the animal was raised, or whether it was given antibiotics, or the animal's life. So to us, we coined the phrase naked because that meant nothing, zero. No antibiotics, no growth stimulants, no drugs of any kind. So if the animal is naked, then from the day it was born, nothing has been administered.
And that's what we should be eating, right? Who wants all this extra stuff in our bodies? We're going to get that in so many other ways, when you're drinking your soda or you're having tomato sauce or ketchup on something. Everything's got something in it that we probably don't need. So let's at least start from the source as best as possible. What I'm astonished by, I went to the old National Chicken Council last night doing some research. You picked a good industry to jump into. And the reason I mention it is I have this stat. We'll have to throw it up. This stat goes back to 1960, and you guys might already know what I'm talking about. But this is talking about per capita in pounds, the consumable product of various proteins for over the last 50 years. Now, when we go back to 1960, you look, beef was kind of king, and beef was about 60 pounds per capita. So I guess that's per person, right? In a calendar year, someone's eating 60 pounds of beef in that time. There was the heyday of beef in 1976, 1977, kind of right around where I was born, where people were eating 94 pounds of beef. From 60s. I mean, really, we added 22, 23 pounds per person per year just in beef. Now, pork, chicken, all the other proteins, we're all kind of like variables. The one thing that I noticed is beef throughout the years since then, since 1976, has been a rapid decline. It has dropped down to the 70s during the 1980s, down to the 60s during the 1990s, and now it kind of hovers here in the last 5-6 years that beef is kind of on an average of about 57 pounds per person. Ron, you're shaking your head. Is that about right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it has declined quite a bit.
And, obviously we have fast food and we have all this. We have to imagine that the huge uptick with beef had to be hamburgers and fast food, and that was really dominant in the 70s and 80s. But then, of course, we broadened our horizons, and the reason I bring all this up is if you let's go look at the same stat, and let's look at chicken. Now, in 1960, when beef was at 63 pounds, chicken was at 28 pounds. So chicken was pretty low, but swiftly the very next year it jumped to 36 pounds. And then as you go, every single year with minimal change, but for the most part, every single year steadily increased to then 50 pounds at 1984, to 66 pounds in 1992, to 77 pounds in 2000, all the way down to 93 pounds, almost exactly that top number we talked about in 1976 with beef, for chicken today in this year, estimated for 2019, 93 pounds. So you look on a graph, which I have up here, it shows this crazy increase on this graph. Chicken is the green, and poultry is the blue, just in general. So turkey has gone up, and poultry, all those things have gone up, whereas beef had this little spike in the 70s and then kind of went down. Pork has always been pretty steady, hovering around the 50 to 60 pounds per, and then the very lowest one, turkey and fish, tend to only make up about 15 pounds or so. So whether your dad, Alvin, knew this back then or not, you picked the right industry because we're all jumping into chicken more than anything. But I'd love to know why. Why do you think we've gone so heavily into chicken in our diet as opposed to other proteins?
Well, first of all, let me say I would like to say that my dad and I were really smart, and we just, we had this vision of where poultry was going to go. But that's absolutely not true. He happened to be working in the poultry business when he started the distribution of poultry as a business, as his business. What has happened, there are a couple reasons for that. In fact, when I got into business, I thought we were in the wrong business because beef was number one, undisputed. Yeah. Pork was actually number two. Yeah. And chicken was number three. So we were last on the demand chart. What happened was the concerns over health from eating red meat and eating beef, and the cost. Because of the length of time it takes to finish cattle, even in a feedlot where they're fed corn, which is not a natural diet for a ruminant, they were able to bring the cost of beef down, but they could never compete with chicken. And because of what I mentioned earlier, the efficiencies that have been gained by the poultry industry, quite honestly, chicken has just become the cheapest meat. And it has the reputation for being the most healthy because of the low fat.
Right.
Now, there's some this is partly how we ended up getting into the beef business. Again, listening to customers. We had this specialty chicken program, the heritage program that we had launched, and bringing the product in from France. And I guess a lot of my chef customers thought, well, you're crazy enough to do this. Are you ever going to look into doing grass-fed beef? And I said, no. And I said, why? And they said, well, the trend is that people are looking for grass-fed beef for health reasons because the fat is unsaturated versus saturated. And it's high in omega-3s, CLAs. If you look at the health aspect of grass-fed beef, particularly if it's done properly, it's much healthier than conventional corn-fed beef. But they said the product's terrible. And I hate to say that, but if a lot of people that have bought grass-fed beef at a farmer's market from a local farmer, and nothing against the local farmers, but again, that business has become so complex and so complicated. That was about the time that I have customers again saying, why don't you look at beef and why don't you do grass-fed since you're doing natural type products and produce a product that's delicious. Again, it pushed my flavor button. And I met about that time Dr. Alan Williams, who is an amazing guy, a farmer with a PhD, as I like to call him. And he was sort of the godfather of grass-fed beef and trying to change grass-fed beef. And he found that one of the problems was genetics, that like everything else, like the chickens that we started in this country, we changed the genetics to grow faster and cheaper. The genetics with cattle have been changed to grow in a feedlot, number one, and eat corn or a corn product, which they do not digest very well.
All ruminants, whether it's a buffalo or whatever. Why can I not think of other ruminants right now?
Lamb,
deer.
Yeah, they don't eat corn. You don't see cows going to a cornfield and just going sideways and chewing on an ear. They eat grass. They eat the land, and so we've immediately just changed what beef was to our flavor profile by changing their diet completely.
Yes, and we changed the health aspects because that's when the fats in cattle went from unsaturated and healthy to saturated. But again, we give, and I'm not a big fan of industrial agriculture, but they have produced a lot of product for a lot of people at a very low price. But it's not the companies. The companies do not set out and say, let's do a really cheap steak. It's the consumer demand. When I see programs and movies about how the meat industry is really bad because they've done all these things to the way in the way they produce meat, It's the consumer that votes with their pocketbook every single day in the supermarket and to a certain extent in the restaurants. The drive for cheaper meat and protein is what's led the industry. If people quit buying corn-fed beef because they didn't think it was good for them, the industry would change fairly quickly.
Yeah, no one would produce corn-fed.
But with that inside, well, 2 points. The government does offer a lot of subsidies to beef farmers to keep that business afloat.
Yes.
I mean, we, as a society in 2008, when the banks were going under, and even before when the car industry was going under, we were railing against our president and government for giving bailouts to these companies because we're like, hey, these are not efficient companies, and we're just going to give you more money to then fail again.
Right.
And basically, we had to change the thought process on it. That's why we have so many alternative fuel cars now. That's why we have better gas mileage. That's why buying a Ford isn't a bad thing anymore. It's like because we said, and actually I will give Ford the credit that it's due. It was never bailed out, and that's why I would drive Ford tough. But we had to change our aspect because, Japan was kicking our ass with cars, and then all the banks, we don't need to get into why that went down, but we were obviously over-promising and under-delivering, and we didn't have enough money to cover anything we were doing for any loans we were offering. But one could make the same argument that the beef industry is kind of crippled right now. We're messing with its feed. It's the quality of the beef itself is not nearly as good as it should be. Grass-fed is fine, but what we all know beef to taste like is over-marbled and really fatty, and it is delicious when you try it that way. And when you have grass-fed, it's really lean. So,
not necessarily.
I'm glad you brought that up because I want you to get into there. But the typical way is it's not a perfect industry. So much so that if we didn't, as the government, as the society, if we didn't offer financial bailouts or subsidies, then beef, a quarter pounder would be $12. Anything like that. A steak at a restaurant would be, $93, not $65 when you go to one. So, meaning we're compensating for an industry that is not necessarily thriving.
Right.
And so, and with that, going back to the stats that I had, going back all the way, we take all proteins. 1960, when this article first came out, or the study first came out, we, as a society of total red meat and poultry and fish and all, we were eating about 160 pounds, 167 pounds to be exact, per person, per capita. And now this year we're at 220. So it doesn't matter how many people we have, but obviously now we have more people, so that is just more product in general. But we are eating, what's the math? 53 more pounds of meat a year. And I'm not sitting on a soapbox. I'm not a vegan.
Protein.
Of protein.
Yeah, not just meat.
And part of the reason for that
this is of when
I
I
thought
say
you're
meat,
including fish in there as well.
Okay, yes, of protein, of meat, of animal product, right? And so we're just adding so much more into our diet. So I then went, maybe what's going on with the vegetables? So are we eating more vegetables too? Is everything raising? Now, my studies don't go all the way back. I tried to go back as far as I could, and it only went back to 2000. But for the last 20 years, give or take, vegetables have gone on a decline as well, which is not good. Like, we're eating less vegetables. We're eating a ton more meat. So our diet is just, what are we eating? And of the vegetables, the two top vegetables, I'm sure everyone in this room could kind of figure it out. Let me pose it to you, Matt. What's the number one vegetable consumed in America?
Broccoli?
No. What are you, George Bush?
Oh, potato?
Yes, potatoes. But number one with a bullet, by the way. It's not just even close. And then number two, I always find to be funny, it's actually not a vegetable scientifically. What's the
tomatoes?
Tomatoes, yeah. Tomatoes are fruits. But that's the number two most. And then when you think about that, it all rounds itself into a Happy Meal because you have beef and then you have French fries, and you have ketchup. And that's basically what our diet is consisted of. I mean, you look at a stat and you're just like, yep, that's an American diet. That's what we eat.
Yeah, I think the health trends, just speaking from a logical standpoint, have dictated that a lot. Like, people go to the gym, you need protein, you want your veggies still, but protein has become king.
Yeah. So let's talk about, because we have other guys in the room over here, let's talk about the other aspects, not just chicken and poultry. which have gone on the increase. But with the naked product you're doing, we alluded to, you're also doing pork, you're also doing beef, and we have a farmer in the studio as well to talk about that aspect of that part of the business and why it was important to Joyce Farms to kind of diversify and expand on the offering. So, Ron, maybe you just set it up.
Well, when I became friends with Dr. Alan Williams, he was working with a company out of Kansas called Tallgrass Beef. And I posed that question to him. Why can we not produce a high-quality, well-marbled beef if forages and grass are natural for cattle? Then why can we not produce better quality? And he said, we absolutely can. And again, it rang a bell with me because he said, not with today's commercial genetics. So he had isolated and basically saved a dying breed of cattle, an Aberdeen Angus, which was the original Angus that came from Aberdeen, Scotland in the 1800s that Hugh Watson developed. In fact, we can trace our bloodline back to Old Jock, which was bull number 1 in the Angus registry. And
Really?
These cattle are so different than what people refer to as Angus today. They are shaped differently. They are smaller. So it really intrigued me because I'd gone to France to find a different breed of poultry that was superior. So it really kind of caught my ear when he said we can do the same thing. So that led us to getting into the grass-fed beef. And my customers saying, why don't you get into the grass-fed beef business and produce something that's of high quality? And believe it or not, and people say it can't be done, but we're doing it, we are producing cattle 100% on grasses and forages, not a monoculture, not one a type of grass, but a multitude of like 18 to 20 different kinds of plants. And with a rotational grazing program, we are getting grass-fed beef that's grading choice and sometimes prime. We'll get probably 10 to 15% of our cattle will graze prime. We'll get about 80 to 85% will grade USDA choice. Not my opinion of choice, but it's actually graded by a USDA grader. So again, it came back to genetics and how the product was grown.
And you'll have to check our Instagram feed when this comes out. But Charles just showed us a picture on his phone, so I'll have to get that picture from you, Charles. But the marbling on what I assume is all 100% grass-fed beef that you were speaking of was completely fatty looking and marbled out and has all that juicy goodness that we're all looking for when we're throwing a nice big ribeye on the grill.
With healthy fat.
The good fat.
Yeah, and I mean, it eats just like your normal beef. I mean, you're not really going to see any notice. It eats a little cleaner. So we all have dipped olive oil at the restaurant, our bread in it. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't see many people dip a vegetable oil, their bread in a vegetable oil. So think about the same thing with the corn-finished beef. It's such a different fat than having a grass-finished beef. So that was USDA choice ribeye, and they eat exceptional.
Wow.
And that's, we can't sacrifice the flavor to go after all these things. And we've even found some regenerative agriculture practices that have taken us to the next level with the pork and the beef. And that's even cooler.
Let's get it.
This is going to be a huge topic, and we're almost running out of time. We might need to go over time. But where did with figuring out how to make this grass-fed beef and making it delicious, that's where the regenerative agriculture came in?
Well, the seed was planted years ago when I was visiting Wayne Rasmussen's farm out in Norfolk, Virginia, where he had lost the water. His streams were drying up, and his springs were drying up, and his wells were drying up. And he had hired Alan Williams, Dr. Williams, to come in and help him figure this out. And he converted him to regenerative practices, which within 2-3 years, his water came back, restored his water tables, his streams came back, and he had water on the ranches again. So,
just give us a really high-level 101 about what that means to be regenerative farming, meaning you're not tilling, you're not plowing, you're not spraying fertilizers or pesticides.
Right, not using artificial. You have to use some nitrogen fertilizers in the early years.
Okay.
But, yes, no tilling, no chemicals, no inputs on the land at all. And what we've discovered is that, and Alan Savory started this years ago in Zimbabwe. The Savory Institute is started promoting this worldwide. But Dr. Williams and a group of people that he partners with have formed a company called Soil Health Academy. and they're doing seminars across the United States and actually North and South America to train farmers on how to farm regeneratively. But the principles are no plowing, no chemical inputs, eventually no synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And what happens is you rebuild the soil, you rebuild the carbon in the soil, you rebuild the microbes and the bacteria that should be in the soil. And guess what? Over every acre of land, I think there's 36,000 pounds of nitrogen. You know, the air is 78% nitrogen. I often wondered, did God mess up on this? We breathe oxygen, but that's only 21% of our air. Well, as it turns out, the plants need the nitrogen. So when you have the soil healthy with the microbes and the bacteria that's in the soil, they actually pull nitrogen out of the air and supply the plants with nitrogen.
We're just not the most important thing to the planet, is what we're saying here.
Well, I think without food, we'd have a hard time surviving. But it's a process that actually, and the other one of the other components of it, you have to keep a cover crop. So when you finish your cash crop, you go back in immediately. Soil does not need to rest. That's the worst thing you can do to it. So you plant a cover crop. So through photosynthesis, plants pull CO2 out of the air, which cleans the air, but puts the carbon back in the soil. So you put cover crops on, and then the other part of it.
What's a good example of a cover crop?
Well, they can be legumes. It can be. We use collards. We use.
We use multi-species cover crops.
This is Adam, by the way. You haven't spoken yet. Hello, Adam.
Hey, but we use multi-species cover crops. Ideally, we like to see 3 of each sector of the plant species in there, being 3 grasses, 3 legumes, and 3 broadleaves, forbs or brassicas. We use a lot of rye, oats, triticale on the grass side, peas, beans, clovers on the legume side, and then collards, kale, radish, turnips on the forb.
And this diversity
side
of growth is helping to make the soil.
Well, instead of the soil lying bare,
right,
you've got another crop on it that keeps pumping carbon back into the soil and building the soil. But then there's another big component of this. Once that cover crop is up, you run animals on it. And animals go on the cover crop and start using the forage. So right now he's got pork. He's got our pigs will come in and eat the cover crop and also fertilize the land. Yeah,
on our other podcast that I was producing, Something Else About Food with Candace Harriet, we had an episode with the barefoot farmer out there in Tennessee, Jeff Poppin, and he's a firm believer of biodynamic and just kind of doing it the way it was done 100 years ago. He gave so much education, insight into what the ruminants would do to the land by tilling the soil. So going back to those animals that are hoofed animals, that they literally are tilling the soil naturally with their 1 or 2 toed hooves, and basically their feet are a natural plow, and they're also bringing up all the different gases into the air that kind of naturally aerate to the soil, I guess, in my layman's terms of doing it. Charles, you're going to back me up here, or you're going to completely go against what I said?
Even more importantly, having different animals, different hoof sizes, as many multi-species as you can do. It's called mob grazing. So that just helps bring that natural balance to the soil. So you're basically raising cattle and animals, but you're really soil farming. You're trying to build back the soil.
Yeah, it will die. The soil will not bear any fruit or vegetables or whatever after probably just a few seasons, I would imagine, if you didn't take proper care of your land.
Well, back to Adam, and when we were saying he was very reluctant to convert to regenerative agriculture because it's so different what his family had traditionally done for 6 generations. But he can tell you the results that he had after this first year in running animals on the cover crop.
We were having the conversation offline that you were looking for somebody to grow the specific genetics of pig for your
pork.
The
old spots.
Yeah, and so I forget who introduced you to Adam, but anyway, the deal was that Adam, if you were going to work with him, you had to do regenerative farming for a year, and you said, what?
Yeah, I was very reluctant to try it. And he introduced me to Dr. Williams, and Dr. Williams convinced me to give it a try. And I understood what he was telling me, but I couldn't focus on it.
Yeah.
And
Because it was just so different from what you were doing.
I mean, it's absolutely 100% the opposite direction of what was ingrained in me and how we do it.
Can we talk about that for a second just to
Certainly.
understand? Because so as a farmer, your thought, okay, how do I maximize my land, right? So, if I spray this or if I fertilize this, I'll grow it. Everything will grow and everything will grow faster. And you are getting that, but essentially you're killing the long-term process of your soils.
Exactly. We're removing, every time we till the soil, we release the carbon. We're compacting the soils. Synthetic fertilizers actually compact as equally as much as heavy equipment does. We've eliminated our infiltration. That's what Ron was alluding to earlier with, being able to capture, most land in the United States will capture a half an inch of rainfall an hour max. And we increased that infiltration rate to where we can get, 8, 10, 12 inches of rain infiltrated, not run off.
Yeah, and just to clarify that, I didn't realize this, Max. Maybe you knew it. But so when you're doing let's just say the conventional farming, which I think is funny to say conventional farming because for hundreds of years we didn't conventionally farm.
But what we're doing now is conventional.
Is conventional, yeah. But the way that it was done through, I guess, through the 50s
it's
through the 90s.
It's like how the bartenders in the 90s put a bunch of sugar cubes and orange peels in their old fashions. And they're like, no one does that. Don't make your old fashions the 90s style. The old school way of doing it is the now way of making it. We don't put all that crap inside soda water. No soda water in your old fashions. But it's the same idea of somehow in the middle of our growth, we messed up and went on this weird tangent, and then that became the standard. And then it only took somebody to go back to know how we originally did it and bring it to modern day. So, exactly the same way.
Exactly the same way. But anyway, so when you add these unnatural things to your soil, I guess it gets really hard, and thus all your rainwater runs off, and you can't retain any of the water. Yeah. So what Adam was saying, and I guess Alan Williams, he can retain as much water in 4 seconds than most farms can do in an hour.
Yes, and there's another part of that. The money that you spend on some of the inputs also are going out with that runoff. So that runoff is going into our streams and our rivers and is not good for the environment.
Yeah. And it goes back into your bank account, as you let me know earlier. So, Adam, sorry I interrupted you, but you were saying about...
Well, I got to just say, since you said bank account, what did we have last fall here in eastern North Carolina where his farm is? Maybe he can talk a little bit about we were really lucky to be practicing regenerative agriculture because that was pretty devastating, and with the extra cash we were able to help take care of the farm and start rebuilding much faster than your industrial agriculture would have. Wow. But Adam could also touch to that more.
Well, the majority of our farm last fall was under about 8 feet of water, and it's not so much the extra cash that Charles was alluding to, but the decreased expense that we had. It's cash that we didn't have to outlay that we normally would. Helped us be able to absorb that loss.
I see.
But we also had a tremendous amount of resiliency built into our land. So once that water receded, we were able to get out and reseed our cover crops and our forage crops and get them up and growing and get our livestock back on. And as you mentioned a while ago, you're talking about the hoof action of the animal doing the tilling. Well, it's almost right. It's more of a massaging effect.
Yes,
that we get. We don't want bare soil anywhere, anytime. We want it covered all the time, and so tilling, whether it's a natural animal impact or a mechanical impact, it's just something that we don't do anymore. We don't allow that to happen.
How long did it take you to become a convert to regenerative agriculture?
Within just a few months of beginning, we actually started. We've got one little plot that there's like 4.5 or 5 acres on it. We give Alan Williams, Alan, you tell me what to do. We're going to do it here, and that's where we started. Well, the next year, and that was kind of secretive. I wouldn't let my daddy see what we were doing, and I saw what he was trying to tell me. I could understand it by seeing it more than I could by hearing it. And then the following year, we increased that, to about 40 acres roughly. And then in 18, we spread that all the way across the farm, and as well again, what we're doing this year will be 100% regenerative, not all non-GMO crops. So that's where we're.
And you would say your land is healthier than ever, and
absolutely. I've shared this past week with Ron and Alan both. I take soil samples every year, even before I started the regenerative aspect, and we can see the health in the soil coming up. With maximum 3 years of investment into this, and you're talking about a small portion at 3 years. We've really only got 1 full year of investment across the whole farm. So,
and we have pictures we can supply you too for Instagram. Last year, when he decided to go this way with his cash crop, primarily corn, he planted his corn at the same time neighbors were planting corn. And we have a picture that was 1 month after he planted and also 1 month after the neighbors planted. And the growth, the color of the corn, the greener color of the corn, and the height of the corn was dramatically better on Adam's farm. And one other thing that stands out in this picture, in the conventionally farmed cornfield, there's a lot of water, standing water, that just couldn't get into the soil, and you don't see that on his plots at all. So
interesting. So even being by taking this step of going through regenerative farming, it made your farm more efficient and a better product in the end. So it wasn't just to have better flavor, but also to be more efficient, right?
Well, and to grow a better animal. With Alan Williams, we decided to take his offer of supplying us the Aberdeen Angus. Dr. Williams has spent a lot of time in research and finding pockets of what he thought was the old Aberdeen Angus, the original Angus that first came into this country before we, quote, improved it and screwed everything up. So he would take those animals and breed them, and he built a seed stock, which is the seed stock we use today. And like I said, we can trace that back to the first registration, the first bull. But what we found is that these animals, surprisingly, do very well on grass and forages. And he took it a step further with a very scientifically designed forage program with the multiple species plants and rotating the animals from pasture to pasture. So it gave us the efficiency, but it also gave us the highest quality, best flavored grass-fed beef that you'll find anywhere. But again, it's a bold move to make these changes. And so from the beef, we had the success with the poultry. We had the success with the beef, but that was a little longer time frame. It took 5 years. Cattle, getting in the cattle business is a completely different business than poultry.
Yeah.
And the main reason is because you've got to move every piece of that animal. You've got to move every part of it, or you're going to lose money on that animal. The margins are very thin. And so I ended up, it took me twice as long, 5, almost 6 years, to get it to a break even. And it cost me almost twice as much money as I originally had hoped we could develop this program with. But what kept me going was the amazement of the flavor and the quality and the eating experience that some of the best chefs in the country were telling me that I can't believe this is grass-fed. And we've got some of the best chefs in the country who told me I would never have put grass-fed on my menu, and it's on their menus now. From New York to Alabama to New Orleans and all over the country. So once we got that program stabilized and got it out of the red, then we looked for pork. And again, we turned to Dr. Williams, who has a PhD in animal genetics, to find us the best pig in the world, or at least one of the best pigs in the world. And again, would have been very easy to stay with breeds that we already had here. But like everything else, the Berkshires, the Durocs, the Yorkshires, a lot of these animals have been bred over and over again, so there's no real pure genetics.
Right.
And so Alan selected, and I guess he likes to give me a challenge, but we finally decided on the Gloucestershire Old Spot from England. And it's a breed that is on an endangered list. It's an old world pig we can trace back to the 1790s that had the flavor that pork used to have. Remember years ago, the pork industry, in order to compete with the rising demand of chicken, decided that they wanted to be the other white meat. Well, they did this by breeding fat out of the pork so it could be healthier. Well, fat is flavor. Mm-hmm. So when you take the fat out of an animal, you've lost the flavor.
Right.
So they were making a health argument that was compelling, but there was no flavor there. That's why in most instances, if you go in a grocery store and look at a pork loin, it's been pumped. It'll say solution added. So it's been injected to give it moisture and to give it flavor. But we wanted to go back to the old world animals, and these animals, my understanding is there's less than 1,000 old spot pigs left in England. And we have on Adam's farm now about close to 3,000 now. And we started with 3 boars. So again, a program that we've had to invest a lot of money in over the years, having faith that this product is going to become profitable.
And we're looking at pictures right now of a pork loin that is just completely beautifully marbled with a nice fat cap on the end that would be excellent to put on the grill or barbecue or however you want to do it, especially here in North Carolina. But that's the type of hog you want to be
was going
cooking.
For flavor. Again, it all came as a result of my pursuit of flavor in a natural way.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting about these pigs is that they're pasture raised. And because of this diversity of forages, they're actually grazing. People do not think pigs will graze, but we have videos where the pigs are going through the pasture and eating a lot of the forage. So we think, and we're going to do some lab testing on this sometime in the future, but because they're consuming so many plants, so much plant life, plants for their diet, that they're probably the fatty acid profile of these pigs is going to be fairly healthy. I can tell you it's delicious, and it's a silky taste or feel, but I've never tasted pork like this. And again, we're in the very beginning stages of it, but
I think the most important thing is for our listeners, they want to know how and where they can eat this delicious food. Now, we said it's mainly going to wholesale, and so that's going to restaurants, and a lot of our listeners are in the business, so they're chefs and general managers and all. So for one,
how would a chef find you guys?
Can't speak.
They can easily find us through our website. We try to be out in the market a lot too, but if you guys are having a local meal, you should go over to Death and Taxes. They have the strip, and also they're doing something with the pork now.
Nice.
Also, if you go into Charlotte ever, Midwood Smokehouse is now using the pork butts. So that's
Charlotte's
a great.
got a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 19 commercials during the NCAA tournament today.
Oh, gosh,
Charlotte's
so many.
working hard.
Seriously.
Those are some great spots to go and try. Littler here has the Poulet Rouge almost always on her menu. They do a phenomenal job.
Oh, yeah.
But chefs mainly, I know a lot of chefs listen to the podcast. That's why I got started listening to it when I travel.
But if a chef specifically wants to work with your product, they just go online and
go online and they can put out an info, or they could, reach out to one of the sales reps, which would be myself or Nate Morgan.
And it's joyce-farms.com.
Yep.
JOYCE, everybody.
Yeah. And if you're a chef, you don't know who Joyce Farms is, come on, get your head out of your butt.
Well, we're available. We'll get them the product any way we can. We have a couple of different distribution channels already in North Carolina, but we don't like to have anything stop us from being able to talk with the chefs. So we talk to them, talk about what their needs are, and then try to fill them. So
it's fantastic.
Awesome.
Gentlemen, I appreciate you all coming out here. It's a pretty long drive to just get out just to talk on these podcasts, so we appreciate it. Matt, what do you have?
Thank you guys for coming down. Thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for the pursuit of flavor. We're going to have you guys back for just a whole panel on regenerative farming.
And I was going to suggest that. He can go into detail on how much money it saved him.
And the product is delicious, so everybody wins. Everybody out there, go seek out Joyce Farms. You will eat and drink deliciously.
Thanks for listening to the NC F&B podcast. And if you've stuck with us this long, review us on iTunes, and remember, 5 stars are encouraged.